This weekend saw huge protests in support of Black Lives Matter. The protesters were highlighting a range of issues, of course, but with one central demand, so far as I can tell. They want the British government to grow a set of bollocks and forthrightly condemn Trump's administration for allowing, even inciting, the murder of black people on US streets. They want the killing to stop, both here and abroad, and they want our government to stand up and be counted as part of the cure, instead of passively negotiating trade deals with a country whose record on human rights abuses is so blatantly bad, it isn't even surprising anymore. Lots of people, lots of Brits, would sympathise with that demand. Even if they didn't agree, they can see why so many people think it's important. And that, my friends, is precisely why you haven't heard it before. Because it doesn't fit the media narrative. Because it's reasonable. Instead, we heard about some other things. Somebody painted Black Lives Matter on the cenotaph. A friend of mine was outraged because it was done by mindless thugs who don't understand history and the fact that black and Asian people fought and died for us in those wars too. For us. In those wars too. What a great way to rip up outrage. Focus on a handful out of thousands who disrespected our war dead and our history and the people who died for us in those wars too. But maybe they didn't misunderstand. Maybe they targeted the cenotaph specifically because it was oppressive colonialism that forced black and Asian conscripts to die for us in a white man's European war. Maybe they understood history all too well and were protesting at their fellows being dragged into a conflict not of their making. Who knows? I don't know. I wasn't there. Do you? Then there's a statue in Bristol, a notorious slaver who's no longer honoured in bronze by the people of Bristol. Yeah, given what he stood for, it might be the perfect way to illustrate that Black Lives Matter, by disrespecting the bloke who kidnapped, enslaved and murdered so many in the dark holes of slave ships on the Triple Crossing. And finally, there's the COVID argument. Here my friend suggested that maybe the organisers should have told people about COVID-19 before they arrived. But that ignores two very clear points. That's not how demos work. You don't know who's going to turn up in advance, and you certainly can't impose social distancing. And black people aren't really that stupid. They already know about COVID-19. They also understand that they're the ones at greatest risk, and yet still so many black and brown and yellow protesters marched shoulder to shoulder with their white brothers and sisters, despite the risks. Because for them, this is too important, too immediate to be postponed. But here's the argument I really want you to stop using. The what about the NHS argument. I'm an NHS worker, a community nurse. For the longest time I was travelling around giving injections and otherwise being in close contact with community patients without the right PPE, often without any PPE at all. And yes, I hate the virus. I hate what it's done to my society. I hate the fact that friends and relatives have to continue to isolate themselves. And I hate the fact that we're heading for a peak sometime early in July because of the government's mishandling of the situation. And I hate the fact that this will also have been impacted by the gatherings across the country in support of Black Lives Matter. But that doesn't make me a legitimate excuse for you to object to demos without seeming too racist. Where was your outrage when the English Defence League threw a petrol bomb directly at a Walsall butcher? Where was your outrage when the same group of white gammon marched into Tower Hamlets looking for trouble, or when Britain First did the same repeatedly in Bury Park and in Dover? Where was your outrage when white tourists went flooding into my county, keeping our COVID reproduction rate high? Where was your outrage when middle-class white people conged up the suburban street? Where was your outrage when white people crammed into the pubs and clubs the night before lockdown, or when the government set COVID-19 patients into care homes, far too often for it not to have been deliberate policy? You say all lives matter, and so do I. So do we all. But you don't really mean it. If you did, you'd support these demonstrators. If you did, you'd be aghast at the decision by this government to abandon refugees in Calais, even lone, unaccompanied children. If you meant it, you wouldn't have voted Tory knowing how many would die because of their continued attacks on the NHS, and that was before coronavirus. You wouldn't continue to pretend that Boris Johnson's done a good job, or that Cummings isn't deliberately engineering the deaths of the poor and elderly. But what you actually mean is your racial group is important, even though the problem is affecting the black race. You want it to be about you. Well, get over yourself, sunshine, because it's not. I'm a white bloke. I've lived in this country for 55 years and never once have I been stopped or searched by a policeman. I've never been spat at or insulted because of my colour. I've never been assaulted because of my religion. I've never been passed over for a job because of my name, my colour, or my culture. And I don't expect to be beaten to death by police in the street. I once believed that the working man's privilege was to work himself to death trying to feed his family. Now I've changed my mind. That's not my privilege. That's my burden. My privilege is to bear that burden without facing all of the other crap that my black and brown brothers and sisters have to face every single day of their lives. Black lives that matter.